The December morning at Benton University carried the quiet stiffness of final week exhaustion. Frost clung to the bare branches, lining the quad, and students moved in clusters, collars turned up, coffee cups steaming in their hands. Inside Harrington Hall, room 214, the atmosphere was subdued, but attentive. This was Professor Malcolm Rhodes' final lecture before the holiday break, and despite the fatigue of the semester, his class usually carried a different tone, measured, respectful, focused. Malcolm had earned that over years of teaching. He stood at the front of the room, tall, composed, adjusting his notes beneath the projector screen. He wore a charcoal blazer, pressed slacks, and a Christmas tie that stood out against the muted colors around him. The tie was bold, deep red and green, stitched with subtle gold accents, not flashy but unmistakably festive. It was the kind of tie that carried intention rather than trend. Malcolm wore it every December without fail, the same one year after year. As students settled into their seats, a few noticed the tie and smiled quietly. Others barely looked up from their laptops. Malcolm waited, letting the room fall into silence, the way he always did, not demanding attention, but allowing it to come to him. When it did, he began, his voice steady, calm, practiced. He was midway through outlining the day's topic, ethical leadership and power dynamics in modern institutions, when the interruption came. It wasn't loud at first, just a snort from the middle rows, followed by a whisper that carried farther than intended. "Is this a business class or a Kwanzaa parade?" The words landed unevenly, rippling through the room before anyone fully processed them. A few students stiffened, others glanced around, unsure whether they had heard correctly. Malcolm paused, the marker hovering just above the whiteboard. His eyes lifted slowly, scanning the room until they found Tyler Grant. Tyler sat back in his chair, one ankle resting casually on his knee, lips curled in a grin that suggested he was already amused by whatever reaction might come next. He was known in the class confident, loud, well-dressed in the effortless way money made possible. His father's name carried weight on campus, though Tyler rarely bothered to hide that fact. Malcolm held his gaze for a moment, giving Tyler an opportunity to reconsider, to soften, to retreat into the excuse of humor. Instead, Tyler leaned forward, louder now, emboldened by the attention. "No offense, Professor," he said, his tone dripping with artificial innocence, "but you people always do too much. It's just a tie, right?" The room froze. The hum of the projector felt suddenly intrusive, too loud in the silence that followed. Several students looked down at their desks. One or two shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one spoke. Malcolm felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the kind that came not from surprise but from recognition. He had heard variations of that phrase his entire life, always delivered with the same smile, the same plausible deniability. He had learned long ago how quickly moments like this could be reframed, how easily harm could be dismissed as misunderstanding. He set the marker down slowly. His face remained composed, but something behind his eyes changed, an inward calculation, a weighing of options. He could address it directly. He could redirect. He could ignore it. Each choice carried consequences. He had learned to anticipate better than most. "Tyler," Malcolm said evenly, "this is a classroom. We focus on ideas here, not personal commentary." Tyler shrugged, unfazed. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking." He glanced around, seeking validation. No one met his eyes. "I mean, it's distracting. Kind of unprofessional, don't you think?" The word unprofessional hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Malcolm had been called many things in his career: articulate, intimidating, difficult, but unprofessional was the accusation that always came last, the one that justified everything that followed. A student in the front row shifted, lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. The silence deepened, becoming its own kind of complicity. Malcolm noticed it all, the way people avoided looking at him, the way Tyler's confidence fed on the absence of resistance. "Let's move on," Malcolm said finally. His voice did not rise, but it hardened, settling into a tone that signaled finality. He turned back to the board, writing the next point with careful precision. "Ethical leadership requires accountability." Behind him, Tyler laughed softly. Not enough to be reprimanded, just enough to be heard. The rest of the lecture limped forward, fragmented. Malcolm spoke, but the rhythm was gone. His words felt heavier, each sentence carrying the weight of what had been left unsaid. Students typed dutifully, though many were no longer focused on the material. The room felt divided, not loudly, not visibly, but in the subtle ways that mattered more. When the class ended, chairs scraped against the floor as students gathered their belongings. A few lingered, hesitating as if considering whether to approach Malcolm. None did. Tyler was the first to leave, shouldering his backpack with a satisfied smirk, already tapping at his phone. Malcolm waited until the room was empty, before sinking into his chair. He stared at the tie, fingers brushing the fabric lightly, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed if anyone were there to see it. His reflection in the darkened screen of the projector looked older than he felt, lines of restraint etched deep. He gathered his notes slowly, methodically, as though order might restore something that had been unsettled. Outside, the hallway buzzed with students moving between classes, laughter echoing faintly through the door. Life went on, indifferent. Instead of heading to his next meeting, Malcolm walked back to his office. The corridor felt longer than usual, each step heavy with memory. Inside, he closed the door and stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet. His computer hummed to life as he sat, the screen illuminating his face. He navigated to the course portal, fingers steady, movements precise. The lecture recording was already processing, a digital archive of the moment he knew would not remain contained within those walls. He watched the progress bar for a few seconds, then clicked delete. A confirmation prompt appeared. "Are you sure you want to permanently remove this file?" Malcolm did not hesitate. He confirmed the deletion, watching as the screen returned to blank normalcy, as if nothing had happened at all. But as he leaned back in his chair, the weight of the morning settled fully, and for the first time, a thought surfaced that unsettled him more than Tyler's words ever could. Silence, he knew, had a cost, and by choosing it, he might have already paid too much. Malcolm Rhodes remained seated in his office long after deleting the lecture recording, the silence around him growing heavier by the minute. Outside, the campus moved with seasonal cheer, holiday music drifting faintly from somewhere down the corridor, laughter echoing as students compared travel plans. Inside, the air felt different, stagnant, as though the room itself remembered things Malcolm had spent years forcing himself not to. His office was modest, carefully organized. Shelves lined with books on ethics, leadership, civil rights history, and institutional power framed the walls. Framed degrees hung straight, never crooked. Photos were minimal, intentional. One in particular rested on the corner of his desk. An older black man in a dark suit, standing at a podium, mid-speech, his face caught between resolve and exhaustion. That man was his father, Elijah Rhodes. Malcolm picked up the photo, thumb brushing the edge of the frame. The Christmas tie lay folded beside his papers now, no longer around his neck. He had removed it as soon as he sat down, as if the fabric had absorbed too much of the morning's weight. He had built his reputation carefully, brick by brick, knowing how easily it could be dismantled. On campus, he was known as calm, articulate, fair. Students described him as demanding but just. Colleagues often used the word gentleman, usually said with a tone that implied surprise. Malcolm understood the unspoken meaning behind it. Gentleman meant non-threatening. It meant controlled. It meant safe. That reputation had not come easily. Years earlier, at his first faculty appointment, Malcolm had been passed over for tenure despite glowing evaluations. The reason given was vague. Concerns about fit, about his research being too focused on race, about his classroom presence being intense. A white colleague with fewer publications and weaker student feedback had received the position instead. Malcolm had protested quietly, submitting appeals, providing documentation. The decision stood. Later came the committee incident. A misquoted email, taken out of context, circulated among faculty, suggesting Malcolm had accused a department chair of bias. He had not. The accusation was never formally investigated, but it lingered long enough to stain his name. Invitations to conferences slowed. Collaborative projects dried up. Doors closed without explanation. Through it all, Malcolm adapted. He learned restraint, learned which battles could be survived and which would only cost him more. He learned that excellence alone was never enough. It had to be paired with silence, with politeness, with gratitude for opportunities that should have been unquestioned. And yet, none of it had broken him. The tie was proof of that. Every December, Malcolm wore it as an act of quiet defiance, a private ritual that connected him to a man who had refused to shrink. Elijah Rhodes had marched, organized, spoken when it was dangerous to do so. He had believed that dignity was not something to be negotiated. When he died, the tie was among the few personal items Malcolm kept close. Wearing it was not celebration. It was remembrance. Malcolm exhaled slowly and turned back to his computer. A blank document stared back at him, the cursor blinking patiently at the top of the page. He typed the date, then stopped. His fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than necessary before continuing. Dear Dean Wallace. The words felt heavier than they should have. He had drafted versions of this letter in his head countless times over the years, always telling himself he would write it when the time was right. This morning had felt like that moment. He wrote carefully, choosing language that was measured, professional. He thanked the university for the opportunity to teach. He cited personal reflection and changing priorities. He did not mention Tyler. He did not mention the time. He did not mention the way the room had gone silent when it mattered most. When he finished, Malcolm leaned back, rubbing his temples. The resignation letter sat there, calm and neutral, bearing no trace of the exhaustion that had produced it. He saved the file but did not send it. A sound in the hallway pulled his attention back to the present footsteps slowing near his door. Malcolm looked up just as a faint shuffle echoed, followed by the soft scrape of paper against carpet. Then silence again. He stood, tension settling into his shoulders, and crossed the room. When he opened the door, the hallway was empty. No students, no colleagues, just the fluorescent lights humming overhead. At his feet lay a plain white envelope. No name, no return address. Malcolm hesitated, scanning the corridor once more before picking it up. The paper was heavier than expected, the contents shifting slightly inside. He closed the door behind him and returned to his desk, placing the envelope beside the resignation letter. For a long moment, he simply looked at it. Years of experience told him caution was warranted. Anonymous gestures rarely arrived without consequence. Still, something in his chest tightened, not fear but recognition. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, as though the writer had taken care not to reveal too much of themselves. They're watching you. Don't quit now. The message was short, stark, and deeply unsettling. Malcolm read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition might reveal intent. His pulse quickened, not from panic, but from the sudden awareness that the morning's incident had not been as isolated as it had seemed. Watching you. He folded the note back into the envelope, his thoughts racing. Who would leave something like this? A student? A colleague? Someone who had seen more than they were supposed to? The idea that his decision to resign was already known made his stomach tighten. As he slid the paper back inside, his fingers brushed against something else, thicker, glossy. Malcolm frowned and tipped the envelope, letting the contents fall onto his desk. A photograph slid out, landing face down. For a brief moment, he considered leaving it that way. Whatever was on the other side had been placed there intentionally, and he understood that once he saw it, there would be no unseeing it. He turned it over. The image was clear, taken at close range. Tyler Grant stood at the center, his face unmistakable, caught mid-expression, arrogance replaced by something darker, something exposed. He was not alone. The setting was unmistakably inappropriate, the moment compromising in a way that went far beyond juvenile behavior. Malcolm's breath caught as the implications settled in. This was not rumor. This was evidence, and whoever had slipped the envelope under his door knew exactly what they were doing. Tyler Grant's arrogance didn't begin in room 2. It was something honed over years of always getting away with things others couldn't dream of trying. At Benton University, he moved through campus like a king without a crown, untouchable, unbothered, and completely aware of the invisible web that protected him. That morning, after mocking Professor Rhodes, Tyler didn't feel fear. He didn't feel shame. He didn't even feel challenged. As the classroom emptied and the murmurs faded behind him, he lit a toothpick between his teeth and swaggered down the marble corridor, pausing only to wink at a girl from his marketing class. Back in the Alpha Sigma Phi house, the tension from the incident hadn't followed him. It never did. The house and off-campus mansion his father had helped remodel was loud with music and laughter. Tyler dropped his backpack by the kitchen island, where two of his frat brothers were mixing cheap bourbon into a gallon of sweet tea. You see Rhodes' face? Tyler chuckled, grabbing a red cup without asking. Looked like I slapped his grandmother with that tie. They laughed, though it was the kind of laughter that echoed a little too loud, a little too fast, as if to fill a space that shouldn't have existed. You think he's gonna report you? One of them asked. Tyler shrugged and grinned. Please. Man wouldn't dare. And he wasn't wrong. Tyler's father, Robert Grant, had poured millions into Benton's infrastructure over the years, endowing the business school, funding the tech lab, donating during every alumni drive. The grants didn't just contribute to Benton, they owned a piece of it. At the administrative level, Robert's reach was woven deep into the roots of the university. Scholarship names bore his brand. Buildings stood under his plaques. Behind closed doors, his opinions shaped hiring decisions and funding allocations. Dean Wallace had taken more than a few meetings in Robert Grant's private golf suite. When Robert suggested politely, but firmly, that a particular professor wasn't elevating the school's reputation, actions were taken. Emails exchanged. Positions reconsidered. Malcolm Rhodes had survived those seasons of pressure through sheer grit and spotless credentials. But Tyler knew the message his father sent was clear. Play nice, or be played. Tyler's confidence didn't come from ignorance. It came from experience. Back in freshman year, he had been caught plagiarizing a final paper, lifting 3 full paragraphs from a Forbes article. The professor reported it. The file vanished from the record within 40. A quiet memo from the dean's office later labeled it a misunderstanding due to citation confusion. Sophomore year, Tyler was accused of harassing a black student during a group project, mocking her accent, and calling her affirmative action Barbie in a private group chat. She brought screenshots to the Title IX office. Tyler issued a public apology that he didn't write. The case disappeared. Now in his senior year, Tyler had no reason to change. He believed himself immune, above consequence. His father had told him, more than once, "We don't get touched by noise, son. We write the checks that silence it." It wasn't just words. Tyler had access to more than privilege. He had access to dirt. Emails between his father and university board members. Photos from golf retreats. Receipts of donations, given the night before certain votes. He didn't fully understand the power structure, but he understood this. His name was on the untouchable list. Still somewhere on campus. Not everyone agreed. In the back row of room 214, a sophomore named Darius Langston had seen everything. While others looked away, Darius kept his phone steady under the edge of his desk, recording the entire interaction. It wasn't his first instinct to post it. He wasn't a clout chaser or activist influencer. He was just tired of seeing silence when, that night, Darius sat at his desk in the corner of his shared dorm room. Headphones in, hoodie up. He rewatched the video 3 times. Tyler's voice was crisp, his words undeniable. The tie, the tone, the laugh, it was all there, crystal clear. He opened his TikTok app, but hesitated. His roommate, Jordan, glanced over from across the room. "You gonna post it?" Darius didn't answer right away. Jordan leaned in, lowering his voice. "He needs to be exposed, man. This time they can't hide it." Darius clicked upload. The caption was simple. "This is how Tyler Grant talks to a black professor. Benton University racism. On campus. Not just at." He set the post to public, hit publish, and tossed his phone on the bed. Back at the Grant residence, a 5-bedroom estate tucked behind a private gated drive, Robert Grant was in his study sipping aged bourbon and watching the markets. His phone buzzed. One of his political contacts had just sent a message. No greeting, no preface, just a link, a video. Tyler, the tie, the caption. Robert stared at it for several seconds before setting his glass down slowly. He didn't move right away. Then, as if jolted by instinct, he opened his private folder and began forwarding emails, cleaning timelines, deleting anything that could tie his son's previous infractions to current donor conversations. He knew how to spin stories, but this time, the game was moving faster. On the other side of campus, Darius refreshed the video. 30 views. And then, within minutes, the comment section exploded. Students shared it. Alumni added angry reactions. People from outside the university began stitching it with their own experiences of academic racism. Tyler Grant's name trended. But what no one knew yet, what even Darius didn't realize, was that his post had triggered something far bigger than a backlash. A student journalist from the school paper had been compiling files on administrative cover-ups for over a year. She had kept it quiet, waiting for the right moment to break the story open. The video was the crack in the wall, and she wasn't the only one watching. Unbeknownst to everyone involved, a former university staffer, now working for a national education watchdog, had set up keyword alerts tied to several universities. One of those alerts just pinged with Tyler's full name. That same night, as Tyler sat in the Alpha Sig living room, joking about how this'll blow over by Monday, his phone buzzed. He glanced down and saw dozens of notifications. His Instagram, flooded with angry DMs. His university email, overrun with reporters requesting statements. He looked at his friends, suddenly quiet. What the hell's going on? Jordan, sitting across from him, held up his phone. Check TikTok. Tyler did. The screen loaded slowly, then displayed the video, his own voice cutting through the silence. Is this a business class or a Kwanzaa parade? He watched himself, stunned into silence. His voice, his words, the entire class frozen. He turned pale. Tyler hadn't planned for this. He knew how to manipulate rooms, not the internet. The anonymity of outrage, the speed of exposure. This wasn't a golf course or donor retreat. It was wildfire, and it had just started to burn. While Tyler panicked and his father scrambled to contain the storm, Darius received a DM from a private account with no profile picture. There's more, much more. Check your email. The moment Darius Langston hit publish, the video began its unpredictable march across the internet like a dropped match on dry grass. At first it was campus only, reposts on student TikTok accounts, shares to class group chats, but within minutes, the algorithm took over. By the time Tyler Grant stepped out of his fraternity house later that afternoon, the video had already reached thousands of screens he would never see. On a school bus rolling toward a holiday weekend, a freshman scrolled through her feed and nearly dropped her phone. She blinked twice. There was Tyler, unmistakable, leaning back with that smug grin, mocking Professor Rhodes's Christmas tie. She watched the clip again, this time slowly, like she suddenly understood something she'd missed in class. At the same time, dozens of others were tagging friends, posting on Instagram, reposting to Twitter, even sharing with strangers in comment threads that spanned cities Tyler couldn't locate on a map. Back in the Alpha Sigma Phi house, Tyler wasn't aware of the firestorm growing around him. His phone buzzed occasionally, but he ignored it, assuming the usual mix of frat group notifications and weekend invites. He laughed with his brothers, popping open a soda and recounting the morning's lecture like it was some victorious moment rather than a controversy. Did you see Rhodes' face? He bragged again, slapping his knee. Man looked like someone stole Christmas from him. His frat brothers chuckled, though one or two shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure whether to laugh or glance at their phones. But Tyler kept going, louder, bolder, convinced that humor was armor and ridicule was a shield no one could penetrate. On the other side of campus, forces Tyler couldn't possibly predict were already in motion. Students in the business school began sending the video directly to friends at other universities. Within hours, Benton Universism began trending on TikTok. The comments poured in, some blasting Tyler for his insensitivity, others defending him under the banner of free speech, and a disheartening number minimizing the entire matter with old, familiar excuses. It's just a tie, he was joking. Stop making everything about race. But for many viewers, the video struck a deeper nerve. It put into stark relief something that had long simmered beneath the surface at Benton. A resentment that racism was ignored until it got loud enough. And even then, only if someone powerful was embarrassed by it. People began to share their own stories, using Tyler's clip as a catalyst to break their silence. Meanwhile, Malcolm Rhodes opened his inbox with a cautious sort of dread. The moment the lecture recording was deleted, he'd assumed things might get uncomfortable, but never like this. At first the messages were simple. Thank you for your courage. I'm sorry that happened to you. You deserved better than that classroom yesterday. These were the emails that nearly brought tears to his eyes, reminders that some students saw more than Tyler's words. They saw a pattern of dismissal and disregard that always seemed to follow black educators in academic spaces. But then the inbox changed. The messages turned angry. They called Malcolm hypersensitive, opportunistic, playing the race card, a troublemaker who should stick to teaching rather than stirring controversy. And deeper still, the threats began to arrive. Not physical threats, no overt violence, but angry, cruel assertions. People like you need to be put in their place. Hope this ruin's worth it. Some of us won't forget this. Malcolm read them with a growing sense of unease, then closed the laptop and exhaled slowly. He wasn't unfamiliar with hostility. He had weathered iced-over glares from colleagues, dismissive comments from parents, and veiled microaggressions that were every bit as real as open insults. But this felt different. This felt like a tide he'd stepped into without noticing the undercurrent. In his office, the quiet was no longer comforting. It felt intrusive, like the silence before thunder. He stood, walked to the window, and stared at the quad below. Students scattered like ants, some laughing, some lost in their phones, all unaware of the storm that had already reached them. As the hours passed, the video spread to regional news feeds. Local news affiliates picked it up with headlines that framed it as a campus controversy, a disputed moment in a holiday lecture, but the framing varied wildly. Some called it a free speech clash, others a blatant act of racism. On Twitter, the hashtag #BentonRacism gained traction, spinning off into related tags that pulled even more attention. The unexpected twist came when a second, unseen angle of the incident surfaced. A student in the back row, different from Darius, had recorded the lecture from another perspective. In that angle, viewers saw something the first clip didn't show. Tyler's tone wasn't just mocking, it was personal. His eye contact lingered longer than necessary. He smirked the moment his comment landed, as if anticipating approval from unseen ally. And while the first video captured context, this one captured intention. This second clip exploded even faster than the first. It was one thing to hear the words. It was another to see the expression behind them. The contempt, the calculated edge. The combination of both angles made the online narrative shift. Suddenly Tyler wasn't just insensitive. He was knowingly cruel. By the time Malcolm finally checked his phone again, the notifications were overwhelming. Emails from professors he didn't recognize, journalists seeking comment, students demanding action, alumni threatening to withdraw donations, and critics from outside demanding resignations. Both his and the university's. He stood in the center of the room, the glow of the screen reflecting in his eyes, like a lighthouse caught in a storm. He took a deep breath and began typing a response to the first journalist who had emailed him, one with a headline idea already drafted. Professor responds to viral racism incident. An exclusive. Malcolm paused over the keys. Should he escalate this further, or would speaking up make him a target rather than a voice? While he hesitated, Tyler's world was crumbling at a pace he didn't understand. Back at the fraternity house, Tyler was finally scrolling through his notifications. What he saw made his stomach drop. The video had gone viral beyond the campus sphere. News outlets had shared it. Memes had spawned. Screenshots of tweets were trending, and dozens of social media influencers had already weighed in. Some mocked him. Some defended him. Some didn't hide their contempt. One account, with millions of followers, had posted, "White student mocks black professor during lecture. Watch what happens next." The caption was enough to send views through the roof. "What the hell?" Tyler muttered, his voice quieter than usual. He had expected pushback. Sure, maybe a few nasty comments. But this? A national audience? That was new. "Dude, ignore it," one frat brother said, attempting levity, but his tone lacked conviction. "Yeah man, it'll die down," another added, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Tyler closed his eyes, trying to breathe through the rising panic. His arrogance had always been his shield, but now that shield was cracking. And then the unexpected twist. Notifications began blinking, with mentions, not from commenters, not from students, but from verified activist accounts, civil rights organizations, and national education watchdogs. Some used the clip as evidence of systemic issues on campuses nationwide. Others called for university accountability. Thousands of retweets, shares, and reposts pushed the incident into a broader cultural conversation, one that no longer revolved around a tie, nor a single student's comment, but around the larger question of racial respect and power structures in higher education. Tyler's phone dinged again. This time, it was an email, not from a friend, not a frat brother, but from someone unknown. The subject line read, "We need to talk about context." He opened it with trembling fingers. The message contained a link to the second video, the alternate angle. His face turned white as the clip loaded. His own smirk, his slow, deliberate eye contact, his enjoyment of the moment he thought would be funny. The video ended. Tyler sat frozen, breath caught in his chest. He wasn't just viral, he was infamous. As Tyler sat in stunned silence, Malcolm's email chimed with a new message, this one from a major news outlet, with bold subject lines and urgent requests. "Exclusive interview request, your story on the racist tie incident." Response needed immediately, and in the same moment, a third unexpected video began circulating, one that would change everything again. The morning after Malcolm received the email from the national news outlet, a faculty-wide message appeared in everyone's inboxes at Benton University. It was sent from the Office of University Communications. Subject line, "Statement on recent social media incident." The email opened with a tone so neutral it was almost sterile. Benton University recognizes the importance of respectful dialogue in all learning spaces. We are aware of a recent video circulating on social media, involving a classroom exchange. After careful review, we believe this incident reflects a misunderstanding and does not constitute a violation of university policy. We remain committed to fostering an inclusive environment for all students and faculty. No names. No apology. No accountability. Malcolm read it twice, jaw tight, eyes narrowing as the words blurred into meaninglessness. Misunderstanding. The same word they'd used when a black colleague's research was stolen and published under someone else's name. Committed to inclusion. The same phrase they printed in brochures while refusing to fund a single cultural center on campus. The statement spread like gasoline across the student body. By lunchtime, it had already been quoted in national articles, dissected in campus group chats, and reposted with captions like, "This is what silence sounds like." Tyler Grant predictably remained untouched. Not only had he faced no disciplinary action, but he was still attending classes, still laughing in hallways, still acting as if nothing had changed. Inside Alpha Sigma Phi, his father's legal team had advised him to say nothing. No public comments, no interviews, no apologies. This will pass, they insisted. Let the university handle the noise. But Malcolm knew better. In the faculty meeting that followed the university's statement, the air was heavy, suffocating with forced politeness and unspoken tension. Chairs scraped awkwardly, coffee cups clinked, and when Malcolm walked in, every conversation stopped. He sat down without a word. The chair of the faculty senate, Dr. Victor Helsley, an older white man with a long legacy at the university, cleared his throat. Let's begin. Victor didn't mention the video, didn't mention the statement. Instead, he launched into an agenda item about holiday schedules. It wasn't until the fourth item that someone brought it up. Dr. Elena Blake, a Latina professor from the sociology department, finally broke the silence. Are we seriously not going to address the video or the university's statement? A few heads turned. Some shifted in their chairs. Victor nodded slowly, as if agreeing to a formality he couldn't avoid. Yes, of course. Thank you, Elena. We are aware of this situation, but I would caution everyone to remain objective. This is a delicate moment for Benton. Malcolm said nothing. He watched, listened, waited. Another professor, a white man from the history department, chimed in. I just think we need to avoid politicizing this. If we react too strongly, we risk alienating students who feel this is being blown out of proportion. Malcolm blinked. Slowly, deliberately. Another chimed in, more carefully. We all support Malcolm, of course, but escalation could bring the wrong kind of attention. Maybe it's best to let this run its course. That phrase again, let it run its course. Like racism was a seasonal cold. When Malcolm finally spoke, his voice was steady, even. Let me clarify something for those who are confused. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a moment. It was a public racial insult. And the university's decision to minimize it has consequences. Not just for me, but for every black student or faculty member who sees this and understands that their dignity is negotiable. The room fell quiet. No one responded. Victor cleared his throat again and moved on. Outside that room, though, the walls were cracking. The Black Student Union had been watching everything, not just the video, but the university's cowardice. They'd held an emergency meeting the night the official statement dropped. The room was packed. Folding chairs, floor cushions, students standing shoulder to shoulder. Kamari Barnes, the BSU president, stood at the front. Her voice shook with fury. They think we're going to let this slide. They think if they make it boring enough, we'll get tired. They don't understand. This isn't about a tie. It's about what it represents. We're organizing. They launched a campaign within 24 hours. Tie-in solidarity. Students began wearing red, green, and gold ties around campus, even those who weren't black. They made signs, printed flyers, created digital toolkits with talking points and historical context. They weren't waiting for the administration to fix it. The protest was scheduled for Friday. Word spread fast, not just on Benton's campus, but across nearby universities. Flyers appeared taped to bulletin boards, slid under doors, passed out in cafeterias. Malcolm received a handmade invitation, folded paper, delivered anonymously to his office. You taught us more than you know. Come see. He kept the invitation in his pocket. But behind the scenes, something darker stirred. That same week, an anonymous Twitter account posted a screenshot of what appeared to be internal university emails. They hadn't been verified yet, but the content was disturbing. One email, dated the day after the video went viral, read, Tyler's father has called, recommending we contain the fallout. Professor Rhodes should be discouraged from further media involvement. We don't need this affecting donations. Another, more chilling, if Rhodes becomes unmanageable, revisit his 2016 review. There were concerns flagged then. We can build a case if necessary. Attached to the thread was a single sentence typed beneath the screenshots. Benton's blacklist is real. The screenshots went viral within hours. Hashtags shifted. Now it wasn't just Benton racism. Now it was Benton cover-up. Malcolm sat in his office, jaw clenched, fingers trembling as he read the leaks. He remembered 2016, the strange resistance during his reappointment review, the sudden drop in peer evaluations, the unexplained vote against his tenure expansion. He had chalked it up to internal politics. Now it was clear. He hadn't been paranoid. They'd been building a file, preparing for a moment, just like this. His phone buzzed again. A message from a former colleague who had left Benton 2 years prior. They're trying to ruin you before this protest happens. Be ready. A new file drops online, and it's labeled Blacklist Rhodes.tbetch, with over 70 pages of university communications, notes, and red flags. Malcolm opens it. On the first page, his name, his photo, and next to it, in red underlined the word liability. The file labeled Blacklist Rhodes.ta had shaken Benton's academic core like an earthquake. Within minutes of its leak, professors were whispering behind closed doors, students were organizing emergency meetings, and the administration was scrambling to explain how a senior tenured black professor had been cataloged like a threat in his own institution. Malcolm read each page in disbelief, his hands cold as he clicked through. There were internal notes from as far back as 2012, questioning his tone, his classroom style, and his disciplinary rigidity, despite years of near-perfect student evaluations. He read a line that stopped him cold. Dr. Rhodes has strong student support, but his emphasis on racial dynamics may create long-term donor discomfort. Monitor. And then, in a 2018 memo, if public perception shifts, we may need to reassess his viability. His background gives him moral leverage that limits administrative intervention. This should be reviewed annually. Moral leverage. Malcolm sat in stunned silence. They hadn't just been tolerating him. They'd been tracking him. That week, tension cracked wide open across Benton University's campus. Flyers now covered nearly every bulletin board and hallway. Student-led news accounts flooded Instagram and TikTok, pushing daily updates on the protest, the leaked documents, and the university's refusal to address them. The Black Student Union didn't slow down. They accelerated. Under Kamari Barnes' leadership, their protest preparations turned surgical. Students painted banners at night, scheduled speeches during peak traffic hours, and met with allies in private study halls, far from the watchful eyes of administration. But Malcolm wasn't celebrating. Every compliment he received now felt double-edged. Students called him a hero, faculty members said he was brave, and emails poured in from across the country asking him to lead the movement. But he didn't want to lead a movement. He just wanted to teach. For years he had operated under the assumption that if he worked twice as hard, remained polite, and avoided controversy, his excellence would protect him. Now that armor was shattered, and beneath it he felt raw. He arrived at campus the day before the protest with that weight pulling at him like a gravity he couldn't shake. Walking across the quad, students whispered his name with reverence. One student, eyes wide, whispered to a friend, "That's him." When he reached the faculty lounge, hoping to avoid the chaos for a few moments, he found only more discomfort. Inside, the mood was tense, hushed conversations, eyes darting to the television where a local reporter discussed the leaked blacklist. When Malcolm entered, the room grew still. Dr. Charles Gibbons, a tenured economics professor and one of Malcolm's longest-standing colleagues, turned toward him with a practiced, condescending smile. "Malcolm," he began, "I just wanted to say, look, I know things have gotten dramatic, but let's not make this bigger than it is." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. Silent. Gibbons continued, "It's a tie, a poorly timed joke. You've made your point. But this, the protests, the leaks, the students chanting your name, it's becoming political." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "You think I wanted this?" Gibbons didn't blink. "I think you're being overly sensitive. You're letting the noise distract from your real strength, being a brilliant educator. Let the administrators clean this up. No need to throw gas on the fire." The words hit harder than expected. Malcolm's chest swelled, not with anger, but with something more corrosive. Betrayal. He turned slowly to face Gibbons fully. "You've been in this lounge 20 years longer than me. And not once, Once, have you had to think about whether your existence might threaten the university's reputation? I wasn't catalogued for incompetence. I was catalogued for being seen. Gibbons said nothing. He adjusted his mug. Malcolm walked out. Back across campus, Tyler Grant remained strangely calm. Despite the media storm, he was confident his father's money would smooth it over. His confidence was so entrenched he began mocking the situation again, this time in private Snapchats. Half-jokes shared with his fraternity circle. But something had shifted. His friend Chase Duncan, a white student, who had known Tyler since freshman orientation, had stopped responding to his messages. Chase had always followed Tyler's lead. They played beer pong together, skipped ethics class together, and even double-dated girls from a nearby sorority. But when Chase saw the second video, the one where Tyler's expression revealed his real intentions, he hadn't been able to shake it. He remembered a conversation from 2 years ago, when Tyler had mocked another black student who'd gotten an internship. Tyler wanted. Back then, Chase laughed. Now he realized it had always been part of a pattern. Chase sat in his dorm that night, watching clip after clip of the protest planning. Then he saw something else. His phone buzzed with a DM. Anonymous. It was a video. One he didn't know existed. Tyler, speaking in a private frat Zoom meeting last year, calling Malcolm a diversity hire with attitude, complaining that Benton was getting soft and needed more businessmen, less social justice poets. Chase's stomach turned. The next morning, students flooded the main quad, wearing red, green, and gold ties. Some wrapped them around their arms, some around their heads. Speakers were set up at the edges. Faculty members, even a few unexpected allies gathered at the steps of Harrington Hall. Malcolm stood at a distance at first, his tie in hand, watching. Kamari took the mic. Her voice rang across the open air, sharp and unwavering. This isn't about a joke. This isn't about a holiday. This is about what it means when a black professor is recorded, ridiculed, erased, and then told to be grateful it wasn't worse. Students cheered. Malcolm felt something swell in his chest. Not pride, not quite, but clarity. Then Kamari turned. We have something to share. A truth too long buried. She raised her phone. We've been told to stop making noise, to stop escalating. But we found something you all need to see. Behind her, a projector blinked to life. Tyler's face appeared on screen. A still from the private Zoom call. Gasps echoed across the crowd. This is Tyler Grant. This is what he really thinks. Not in class. Not in public. But where he felt safe. She played the clip. Tyler's voice filled the air. I don't get how these guys keep getting away with murder in the classroom. We pay these dudes to teach capitalism, not cry about their father's neckties. The crowd froze. Some screamed. Some went silent. And Malcolm, from the edge of the crowd, closed his eyes. As the crowd erupted again, Chase stepped onto the platform, grabbed the second mic, and said into it, voice trembling. That's not even the worst thing he said. I have the texts, and I'm done protecting him. The moment Chase Duncan uttered the words, I have the texts, a pulse of electricity moved through the crowd. Whispers swelled into gasps, then into chants demanding truth. Some held up phones, live streaming the protest in real time. Others turned toward Malcolm, hoping he might step forward, say something, lead. But Malcolm stayed frozen, heart pounding behind his ribs. On the makeshift stage, Chase's hands trembled as he unlocked his phone. The screen glowed, and with it came the weight of his complicity. For 3 years, he had laughed at the jokes, brushed off the language, and ignored the moments that should have raised alarms. I kept these because, I don't know, maybe I was afraid, he began. But after seeing what happened this week, I realized silence makes me just as guilty. He tapped on his screen, and the projector behind him shifted again. A thread of screenshots appeared, green and gray bubbles of damning messages. Tyler's name stamped above everyone. Tyler. They only let her lead that team because she's black. She didn't even speak English right in the pitch. Tyler. Every time a black kid walks in late, they act like we're supposed to say thank you for showing up. Tyler. Rhodes is all image. I bet he got his PhD off affirmative action guilt. The crowd groaned audibly. More texts followed, some laced with mocking memes, others making light of racially traumatic events, with dark, sarcastic humor. But it wasn't just the language that disturbed the students. It was the timeline. The dates stretched back years. One dated back to October 3, freshman year, the same week that the university's Office of Student Conduct had allegedly lost a complaint against Tyler. involving a black student named Maya Thomas. The case was never reopened. As the texts kept coming, a new wave of testimony began surfacing online. Former students, now graduates, began posting to Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn, under hashtags like Benton Truth and Tyler was protected. Maya Thomas herself posted a video within an hour of the protest ending. In it, she looked directly at the camera, her voice calm but firm. "I filed a report my freshman year. I had screenshots. I had witnesses. Tyler mocked me in a group project chat, called me a diversity pet, and told me I should smile more when I speak in class, so I'd look less aggressive. I took it to the administration. 2 weeks later, they said the case was closed due to insufficient documentation. I still have everything. They just never asked again." Attached was a PDF with the original complaint, time-stamped, clear, thorough. The floodgates broke. One by one, more testimonies poured in. A black Arai who had written Tyler up for disorderly conduct, only to be removed from her post after Tyler's father met privately with housing. A financial aid counselor who was told to leave the Grant family out of anything disciplinary. A professor who remembered hearing rumors of Tyler's unofficial immunity. Within 24 hours, the university's public image cracked wide open. National coverage intensified. Evening news anchors framed it as a case study in donor privilege. Talk shows debated whether legacy students were operating above campus laws. Inside Benton's administrative halls, chaos reigned. Emergency meetings were called. Spokespeople rehearsed new statements. Legal consultants whispered worst-case scenarios. And in the president's suite, Dean Wallace sat with his head in his hands as another damning report landed on his desk, this time from a staff member in student affairs, admitting that 2 previous complaints against Tyler had been flagged, then shelved. Still, no official action was taken. Tyler remained enrolled. His face remained absent from disciplinary boards. Malcolm sat alone in his office late that evening. The door closed, blinds drawn. The hum of the campus outside felt distant, almost irrelevant. In front of him were 2 screens, one displaying a news segment discussing Tyler's pattern of harassment, the other his inbox, filled with requests from lawyers, activists, journalists. But Malcolm wasn't thinking about visibility. He was thinking about consequences. All his life, he had walked the line between dignity and diplomacy, survival and resistance. He had seen what happened to black professionals who stepped too far into the light. The quiet terminations, the reputational assassinations, the polite reminders that your role is to educate, not to agitate. He could feel the ground beneath him shifting. If he pushed forward, there might be no return. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Kamari. Her eyes were sharp with exhaustion but lit with a fire. Malcolm couldn't ignore. "We need you," she said quietly. Malcolm stood, stepped around his desk. "I don't want to become their excuse to deflect." "You won't," she said. "But if you don't speak now, they'll erase everything." He hesitated, looked past her, toward the photo of his father on the bookshelf. Elijah Rhodes, speaking on the steps of a courthouse in 1966. Tie flapping in the wind, mouth open in mid-speech. Malcolm had never wanted to be a symbol. But maybe symbols weren't chosen. Maybe they were carved from the moments you couldn't walk away from. He reached for his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in years. Leah Dorsey. She had been his student over a decade ago. Brilliant, relentless, unafraid. Now she was a civil rights attorney based in D.C., known for high-profile university discrimination cases. He pressed call. 3 rings. Then, "Malcolm? Leah, I need a favor." Her voice didn't hesitate. "Say the word. There's a scandal buried in Benton's bones. They've protected a student at the expense of their black faculty and students, and now it's all coming out." Leah was silent for half a second, then said, "Send me everything. Names, screenshots, student statements. If they've been covering for him, they've violated multiple federal protocols." Malcolm exhaled slowly, fingers steady. "We're not dealing with just one case anymore. This is structural." "Even better," she said. "Structural means federal teeth. Let's make it hurt." As Malcolm began compiling the documents, a new email landed in his inbox, with no subject line. Inside was one sentence: "They're about to silence someone, and it isn't Tyler." Attached was a spreadsheet titled, "Active Watch List, Internal Faculty," and Malcolm's name was highlighted in red. The snow arrived late that December, dusting Benton's brick walkways and rustling against the dorm windows like a whisper. Christmas break was days away, and the campus buzzed with tension. Not the usual final stress or festive anticipation, but the kind that settles when truth has been unboxed, and nothing feels the same. Tyler Grant had barely left the Alpha Sigma Phi house in days. Where once he strolled the quad like a minor celebrity, now he moved only in shadows, hoodie pulled low, head down. His name, once equated with power, now lingered in group chats as a cautionary tale. Professors were canceling his mentorships. Fellow students no longer made eye contact. Girls he once flirted with now crossed the street when they saw him coming. Still, he didn't believe it would last. His father had assured him that Benton's PR team was handling everything, and that these people love outrage until Christmas dinner distracts them. Tyler clung to that thought like a life raft, but there were cracks he couldn't ignore. Two of his frat brothers had distanced themselves. His name had been pulled from a prestigious student board he had served on for 2 years, and the internship he'd been eyeing for summer, a fast-track gig at a Fortune 500 firm, suddenly went silent. He tried to rationalize it all away. Temporary, he told himself. They just need the fire to die down. It was 2 days before Christmas when the package arrived. He hadn't ordered anything. No one had. But when he opened the front door to grab a food delivery, there it was. A plain black box, square and neatly wrapped, sitting on the front step. No label, no stamp, just a small cream-colored envelope tucked under the bow. Tyler looked around. No delivery driver, no car pulling away. Just falling snow and early dusk settling over the lawn. He brought it inside, dropped it onto the kitchen island, and opened the envelope first. A short note, written in looping black ink. You still have time to learn. No name. No signature. Just that one line. Tyler frowned. It didn't feel threatening. There was no curse. No warning. But something about the phrasing unnerved him. It wasn't angry. It wasn't mocking. It was disappointing. He unwrapped the box and opened it. Inside, cushioned in tissue paper, lay a hardcover book manuscript, unbound but professional. The title page read, The Measured Fight, Educating While Black in White Institutions, by Malcolm E. Rhodes, unpublished draft. Tyler's stomach dropped. The professor's name was printed in small serif font, elegant and controlled. Below it was a dedication page, for my father who taught me that dignity doesn't come from silence. Tyler flipped through the pages. The chapters had titles like Microaggressions in Ivy Halls, Survival by Excellence, and The White Gaze in Tenure Reviews. He didn't know what to make of it. Was this some kind of passive-aggressive retaliation? A lecture in the form of literature? Was he being trolled? He scoffed. Then, without another thought, he closed the box, walked out the back door of the frat house, and tossed the entire thing into the industrial trash bin beside the loading dock. It landed with a hollow thud, snowflakes spiraling after it like pity. By nightfall, Tyler had forgotten about the gift entirely, but the universe hadn't. That same evening, around 9 p.m., he checked his email. He'd been refreshing his inbox obsessively for the past few days, waiting for a confirmation from the Benton Scholars Financial Initiative, a high-profile merit scholarship that came with a $20,000 award and first access to an elite post-grad pipeline. He had been a shoo-in. His GPA was high enough. His extracurriculars glowed. His essay, while shallow, was clean, and his father had helped fund the scholarship's endowment. But there it was. Subject Application Update. Benton Scholars Program. Body. Dear Mr. Grant, thank you for your interest in the Benton Scholars Program. After a thorough review of this year's applicant pool, we regret to inform you that your application has not been selected. We wish you continued success in your academic pursuits. No explanation. No follow-up. Just a cold rejection. Tyler read it twice, then a third time. His eyes scanned the email for a loophole. Missing attachment? A follow-up link. But it was clear. He'd been dropped. He blinked, breathing hard, then stormed into the living room and dialed his father. Dad, I didn't get it. They rejected me. Robert Grant's voice was tight. That's not possible. I spoke to Harrington 2 weeks ago. He said the board was leaning your way. They must have flipped, Tyler said. Probably after those screenshots leaked. They think I'm radioactive. Robert's silence lasted longer than usual. Then he said, We'll handle it. But Tyler heard something he hadn't heard in his father's voice before. Doubt. 2 hours later, it happened. The university issued a late-night internal memo that leaked within minutes. The subject line was simple. Opening a formal Title VI review process. The content, Benton University, in coordination with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, will begin a formal investigation into allegations of racial bias and systemic administrative negligence concerning student complaints, faculty treatment, and donor influence. The investigation will review claims dating back to no names were mentioned. But everyone knew Tyler's face was already tied to the story in every major outlet. It didn't stop there. Student journalists began updating the school's digital paper in real time. They listed every known incident, the corresponding dates, and matched them against now public records of Tyler's father's donations. There was a pattern, and it wasn't subtle. Malcolm read the memo alone in his study. His tie sat folded beside his keyboard, next to a highlighted copy of the anonymous faculty watch list that had named him as a liability. He hadn't told Leah Dorsey about the package Tyler received. He hadn't even known about it, but something told him the manuscript had reached its intended reader. Maybe not in the way he'd hoped, but it was out now. His truth was out. And with the university finally under federal review, silence was no longer an option for anyone. That same night, Malcolm received a text from Leah. Do not delete anything. They're coming for your records next. And then a second message. Seconds later, I just got access to an email chain between the board and Tyler's father. You need to see what they were planning before you got the tie. Malcolm didn't sleep that night. Leah's text about the email chain between Tyler's father and the university board played on loop in his mind. More haunting than any slur, more dangerous than any rumor. Whatever plan they had made before the incident, that tie, that class, that moment, wasn't just a reaction. It had been premeditated, strategic. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was exposure. By sunrise, Malcolm had made a decision. He wouldn't retreat. He wouldn't disappear behind the headlines. Not now. Instead, he turned inward toward the place the truth had been hiding all along. The faculty. For years, Malcolm had existed in a tense professional purgatory, nodding at colleagues who used colorblind as a shield, sitting on panels where diversity was discussed like an experiment, enduring casual lunchroom conversations, where phrases like, "You're one of the good ones," were tossed like compliments. But now the whispers had started. In corners of faculty lounges, in late-night office chats, in draft emails, never sent. Professors were talking not publicly, but to each other. Some expressed guilt, others fear, and some, too many, expressed resentment that the problem had become so public. Malcolm had no intention of waiting for them to find their courage. He started making appointments, one by one. The first was with Dr. Elaine Thurman, a tenured professor in the communications department, who had been at Benton for nearly 30 years. She had co-chaired the ethics committee, served as a mentor to new hires, and been lauded as a pillar of academic consistency in a glowing alumni newsletter just last fall. Her office smelled of tea and aged paper. Malcolm stood near the door, arms folded. How long have you known? Elaine blinked behind her glasses. About Tyler? No, Malcolm said softly. About all of it. She hesitated. Malcolm, I've always admired your work, your strength. That's not what I asked. Her voice lowered. We knew the grants had influence. We didn't know how far it reached. Yes, you did, Malcolm said, voice calm. You just hoped it wouldn't land on your desk. She said nothing. Silence is complicity. Elaine, you've had tenure longer than I've had a nameplate here. You could have done something. Elaine looked down at her hands. It felt like a fight I couldn't win. Malcolm leaned in. It wasn't your fight to win, but it was never your place to watch us lose it, either. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just nodded. By the end of the week, Malcolm had confronted 6 other faculty members. Each conversation peeled back a layer of academic diplomacy, revealing the rot beneath. Some admitted they had heard students complain, but they assumed it was being handled. Some confessed that after speaking out once, they were warned to choose their battles. One, an adjunct lecturer, broke down entirely and told Malcolm that he once wrote a letter in defense of a black student harassed by Tyler, only to be blacklisted from a full-time position a semester later. But then came the most unexpected encounter. Dr. Harold Seaton. Harold had always been an odd figure on campus. Quiet, meticulous, the kind of man who rarely spoke in meetings, but somehow knew everything before anyone else did. He had taught political theory for nearly 2 decades, and often kept to himself. But on Thursday afternoon, as Malcolm prepared to leave his office, there was a knock at the door. Harold stepped in, holding an old external hard drive in his hand. Close the door, he said. Malcolm did. I've been waiting for the right time to give this to someone, Harold said, placing the hard drive on Malcolm's desk. It's all there. Complaints, emails, internal reviews, 10 years worth. Malcolm's breath caught. Where did you get it? I used to sit on the faculty retention committee. They thought I was just some quiet white guy with a retirement plan. They forgot I had eyes. Harold leaned forward. Every time a complaint was filed, A copy was sent to the internal review system. Someone tried to clean it up a few years ago, wiped the main server, but I had made backups. I kept them. I thought maybe someday it would matter. Malcolm stared at the hard drive. Why now? Harold sighed. Because I'm tired of being safe. Safe has gotten us nowhere. Malcolm nodded once. They didn't shake hands. They didn't hug. Harold just turned and walked out. Alone in his office, Malcolm plugged in the drive. It booted slowly. An old model. But once it opened, he saw the contents. Folders by year. 2013, 2015. Onward. Each folder had subcategories: faculty complaints, student reports, administrative edits, donor intervention. Some files were just PDFs, clean, dry, bureaucratic language. But some were damning: screenshots of racial slurs written in dorm rooms, with no follow-up report, emails from a now-retired administrator, advising professors to avoid pushing too hard against high-profile donors, faculty evaluations with notes like, student seems overly emotional, possibly perceives racial undertones where none exist. And then Malcolm saw it. A folder titled Tyler G. Suppressed files. His hand trembled as he clicked it. Inside were 5 documents. A withdrawn complaint from a black female student dated fault, a group chat transcript showing Tyler mocking a disabled student and calling her a quota baby, an email from a faculty advisor who warned that Tyler was targeting minority students in team environments, a screenshot of a Benton administrator emailing a donation acknowledgement to Robert Grant, sent 1 week after a formal complaint against Tyler was closed, without action, a buried Title IX inquiry, with the case number redacted. Malcolm sat back, stunned. The truth had always been there, documented, archived, hidden, all protected by the same system that had tried to label him a liability. He saved backup copies to 2 encrypted drives, and emailed Leah. Subject: it's worse than we thought. Sending now. He stared out the window as snow continued to fall. A quiet storm in the quiet campus night. He thought of every student who had walked into his office, eyes down, voice low, unsure if they were allowed to speak their truth in a system that had already decided they were exaggerating. And he thought of every professor who had smiled at him in meetings, complimented his grace, then turned away when the fire reached their doorstep. Before shutting down the computer, Malcolm noticed one more file buried deep in the drive. Titled simply, Pre-Approval Email. Rhodes Tie Incident. Draft sent 4 days before the classroom incident. He clicked it open. Inside, a message from Benton's head of communications, proposing a template response in the unlikely event a classroom misunderstanding involving Dr. Rhodes becomes public. The moment the suppressed files began circulating in activist circles, Robert Grant knew control was slipping. Not slowly, not quietly. It was tearing away in chunks, and for the first time in his life, money alone couldn't immediately cauterize the wound. By dawn, Robert had assembled a crisis response team in his downtown penthouse: 3 lawyers, 2 public relations strategists, and a former cable news producer, whose entire career had been built on turning villains into misunderstood figures. They sat around a glass table, coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the screen, replaying clips of Tyler's texts and the protest footage on loop. We need to change the narrative, the producer said flatly. Right now, he's the aggressor. That has to flip. Tyler sat at the end of the table, pale, jaw tight, his usual swagger replaced by something brittle. I didn't do anything illegal, he said, more pleading than confident. That's not the point, Robert replied sharply. Perception is the battlefield, and perception can be rewritten. Within hours, the strategy was clear. Tyler wouldn't deny the incident anymore. He would reinterpret it. He would become the victim, not of racism, but of a system supposedly weaponizing race against him. The first video dropped before noon. Tyler sat in a neutral-toned room, soft lighting casting shadows meant to suggest vulnerability. He wore a plain sweater, no logos, no sign of wealth. His voice cracked deliberately as he looked into the camera. I never imagined my life would be destroyed for speaking my mind, he said. I've been targeted because I'm white, because I didn't say the right thing in a climate where dissent is punished. The comments flooded in instantly. Some saw through it. Others didn't. By evening, cable news producers had picked it up. Headlines read, Student claims reverse racism after viral classroom clip. And when free speech becomes a crime. Tyler appeared on a late-night panel, eyes red, voice shaking as he described feeling bullied by Professor Rhodes. He singled me out, Tyler said on air, rehearsed pain trembling at the edges of his words. He made me feel small, Like I wasn't allowed to exist in that space. The host nodded sympathetically. Across the country, Malcolm watched the segment from his living room. Leah on speakerphone. They're doing exactly what we expected, she said. Reversal. Victimization. Emotional manipulation. Malcolm didn't respond immediately. He watched Tyler carefully. The pauses, the strategic cracks in his voice, the way he never once mentioned the words he'd actually said in class. He's lying, Malcolm said finally, but not clumsily. No, Leah agreed. He's lying professionally. The next day, Tyler escalated. Another interview, then another. On one show, he broke down entirely, burying his face in his hands as he claimed the backlash had destroyed his mental health. My family's being threatened, he said. I'm afraid to go outside. All because a professor decided to make an example out of me. The phrase stuck. Make an example. Social media split violently. Some defended Malcolm fiercely, sharing receipts and documents. Others latched onto Tyler's performance, accusing Malcolm of pushing a race agenda, of weaponizing his position as a black professor. Death threats returned to Malcolm's inbox. This time, they were more specific. Leah called him that night. It's time. For what? For the kill shot, she said. They think you're defensive. They think you're cornered. That's when you release the truth. Malcolm sat at his desk, the external hard drive glowing softly beside him. 10 years of buried pain. 10 years of silence. 10 years of institutional rot, carefully hidden behind language like misunderstanding and donor sensitivity. He thought of his father again, of Elijah Rhodes' speeches, of the cost of truth, and the cost of withholding it. Let's do it, Malcolm said. They didn't leak everything at once. That would have been too chaotic. Instead, they curated. First came the Tyler G. suppressed files folder, screenshots, timestamps, internal emails, showing complaints closed within days of Robert Grant's donations. The documents were released through an independent investigative journalist, with a reputation for meticulous verification. Within hours, national outrage erupted. News anchors stopped using the phrase reverse racism. Legal analysts began using words like systemic negligence and donor interference. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning Benton University. Then came the second wave. Emails showing administrators discussing Malcolm as a liability. Notes about monitoring his influence. The pre-written response draft prepared before the tie incident ever happened. The story exploded beyond Tyler. Now it was about the system. Tyler watched it unravel in real time from his childhood bedroom, where his father had insisted he stay off campus for optics. His PR team called non-stop, trying to adjust to pivot again. But the ground had shifted. This wasn't opinion anymore. It was evidence. One anchor looked straight into the camera and said, "This raises serious questions about how many institutions quietly protect misconduct when money is involved." Another asked, "How many Malcolms were pushed out before this one stayed?" Tyler's phone buzzed. His lawyer, his father, a producer canceling his next appearance. "What's happening?" Tyler asked, panic rising. Robert's voice was sharp, controlled but strained. "The Department of Education is involved now." "What does that mean?" "It means this is no longer a PR issue," Robert said. "It's federal." That night, Benton University issued yet another statement. This one longer, more careful, heavier with legal language. It acknowledged potential oversight failures and pledged cooperation with federal authorities. But it was too late. At 2:17 a.m., Leah explained it plainly to Malcolm. "They're opening a formal Title VI hearing," she said. "Discrimination, retaliation, donor interference." Malcolm closed his eyes. "And?" he asked quietly. "And you're being called as a key witness," Leah continued. Under oath. Silence stretched between them. For years Malcolm had spoken truth in classrooms, in articles, in measured tones meant to survive scrutiny. But this was different. This was a room with consequences. This was testimony that could end careers. Or end his. "They'll try to discredit you," Leah warned. "They'll dig into everything. Old emails, old reviews, anything to shake your credibility." Malcolm opened the drawer beside his desk and took out the Christmas tie. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of memory, of lineage, of everything this moment had unearthed. "They've been trying to silence me my entire career," he said calmly. "This time they won't." At dawn, Malcolm received the official notice, subjected Department of Education, mandatory testimony request. Below it, one line stood out in bold. "Failure to comply may result in personal and institutional penalties." and attached to the notice was a list of other witnesses. One name froze Malcolm's breath: Chase Duncan. Cameras flashed as he stepped from the black sedan, tie knotted firm at his collar. The Christmas tie, the very one that had sparked everything. To wear it now was no accident. It was declaration. Inside, the hearing room buzzed with tension. Rows of seats were filled. Legal aides, journalists, civil rights observers, university representatives, student activists flown in from across the country. At the front sat the 5-person oversight committee, their expressions stern and unreadable behind tablets and microphones. Leah walked beside Malcolm, briefcase in hand, her gaze sharp. Stay calm. Be deliberate. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be clear. He nodded, palms damp, mind focused. His testimony was scheduled as the second of the day. The first was Chase Duncan. He entered the room looking nothing like the frat brother he used to be. He wore a navy suit that didn't quite fit, hair trimmed short, face pale but determined. When he was sworn in, the silence was reverent. Everyone knew what was coming. "I was Tyler Grant's closest friend," he began, voice steady. "And I watched him hurt people intentionally. Mockingly. He targeted black students not out of ignorance but entitlement. And no one ever stopped him, because he was protected." Chase pulled out his phone and offered it to the panel. "These are the texts I saved. Not just the ones that went viral. All of them." He looked toward Malcolm briefly. "I stayed quiet because I was afraid. But now I know silence was the loudest betrayal I ever made." The room hung on his every word. Then it was Malcolm's turn. He stood slowly, the gravity of years pressing against his shoulders. As he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, his voice was clear, unwavering. "Dr. Malcolm Elijah Rhodes," the chairwoman said. "You may proceed." Malcolm stepped to the microphone and took a breath. "I've been a professor of leadership ethics for over 20 years. I've spent my life teaching young people how power should be used with integrity. But over the past decade, I've witnessed power used very differently, not to uplift but to shield." He didn't name Tyler immediately. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. "I taught through slights, through silence, through coded evaluations, and carefully hidden erasure. And I told myself, just focus on your work." But when a white student mocked a black professor's Christmas tie in front of a room full of witnesses, and no one intervened, it wasn't just a joke. It was the boiling point of something much older. He paused, watching the panel. This was never just about one tie. It's about what institutions do when black professionalism is mocked, and how they protect those who mock it. Gasps rose from the audience when Malcolm projected an internal email onto the screen. Pre-approval draft. Rhodes tie incident in the event of public exposure, dated 4 days before the actual event. The university planned their excuse before the event even occurred, Malcolm said, because they knew what would happen and who would be blamed. He walked the panel through the timeline. The suppression of Tyler's records, the donor correspondence, the internal blacklist labeling him a liability. Each document was backed by timestamps, sources, hard copies. By the time Malcolm finished, the committee members' expressions had shifted. One leaned forward, jaw clenched. Another scribbled notes rapidly.
"Thank you, Dr. Rhodes," the chairwoman said, almost gently. "We'll now proceed with cross-examination."
That's when Tyler's team played their final card. A woman rose from the back row. Her walk was practiced, polished. She approached the stand with slow control, carrying a printed statement. "I'm Patricia Bowen," she said. "Former assistant dean at Milton Academy, where Dr. Rhodes taught before Benton." Leah's expression shifted immediately. Malcolm noticed. Patricia continued. "During my tenure, I was made aware of a situation involving Dr. Rhodes and a white student who alleged he was made to feel targeted and humiliated in class discussions about race. The matter was informally resolved, but it raises concerns about bias." A murmur ran through the room. Malcolm stiffened. It was 2009. He remembered the incident clearly. A privileged student had stormed out of a discussion about redlining, offended by Malcolm's use of historical examples involving white real estate developers. The administration had refused to issue any consequence, instead asking Malcolm to adjust his framing. "I never humiliated that student," Malcolm said now. "I challenged his worldview. That's what teaching is." Patricia pressed on. "It's a pattern, perhaps. Dr. Rhodes has strong ideological beliefs. He may allow that ideology to shape how he treats dissent." There it was, the inversion. The suggestion that to teach truth was to bias, that to name racism was to create it. Leah rose immediately. "Objection. This is a character inference, not a fact-based challenge." But the damage was done. The committee didn't respond. They simply took notes. Malcolm stood there, holding his tie between two fingers. They would use every tool, every old ghost, every thread they could pull. The hearing continued another hour, but Malcolm barely heard it. His mind raced, not with fear, but with clarity. He knew what this was now. This wasn't about defending himself. This was about enduring long enough to expose everything. When the committee finally adjourned, the chairwoman said only, "We will reconvene to deliberate. You'll receive our findings within the week." The room slowly emptied. Reporters swarmed the hallway. Malcolm gave no comment. Leah shielded him as they exited the building. In the car, silence sat between them. Then Malcolm said quietly, "That woman, Patricia, why her? She's been connected to private consulting firms tied to Robert Grant's donors," Leah said. This was a chess move. Malcolm stared out the window. "They're not playing to win anymore," he said. "They're playing to exhaust us." He closed his eyes, fatigue creeping in like smoke. But the night had one more move to make. Just as Malcolm stepped into his home, his phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. The voice on the other end was low. "Urgent. Mail. I know what they're planning. You need to get out of the house. Tonight." Malcolm froze. "Who is this?" "They're not going to wait for the verdict," the voice said. "You hit them too hard. Check your email. Don't go to sleep here." Malcolm opened his inbox. One new message. Subject: Final contingency plan. Dr. Rhodes. Attached a PDF labeled Draft Statement of Early Retirement, pending misconduct allegation. The date? Tomorrow. The warning came too late. By the time Malcolm finished reading the email labeled Final Contingency Plan, Dr. Rhodes, the house around him felt exposed, like walls made of glass instead of brick. He stood in the dim living room, lights off, the glow of his laptop reflecting off-framed photos and bookshelves that suddenly felt like liabilities rather than comforts. Early retirement. Pending misconduct allegation. They were going to erase him. Not argue with him. Not debate him. Remove him. Leah's voice echoed in his head. "They'll try to exhaust you before they defeat you." Malcolm didn't sleep. He sat at the dining table with his coat still on, phone face up, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. Around 2:30 a.m., he finally stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to look out. The street was quiet, too quiet. The sound came minutes later. Not loud, intentional. The scrape of metal against rubber. The crunch of glass under a shoe. A low, sharp laugh that didn't belong in the cold. Malcolm's heart hammered. He didn't rush outside. He didn't call out. Instinct honed over decades told him to stay still. To observe. To remember. From the upstairs window, he saw movement near the driveway. A figure in a dark hoodie. The porch light flicked on suddenly, triggered by motion, and the figure froze for half a second before backing away. The hood slipped just enough to reveal a flash of color, green and gold. Benton University. By the time Malcolm stepped outside, the damage was done. Red paint streaked across the front of his house, thick and dripping. Slurs carved into the siding. Words he had heard whispered before, now screaming in capital letters. His car sat crooked, all four tires slashed, air hissing out like a dying breath. The message was clear. This wasn't random. This was retaliation. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Someone called the police. Someone else took photos. Malcolm stood on the sidewalk, hands trembling, not from fear but from a deep, aching familiarity. This wasn't the first time truth had been met with punishment. When the police arrived, they asked routine questions, took notes, promised to file a report. "Any idea who might have done this?" one officer asked, not unkindly. Malcolm met his eyes. "Yes." The officer nodded slowly, unconvinced. "We'll see what we find." By morning, the story had already been diluted. Local news ran a short segment. Professor's home vandalized. Authorities say incident may be unrelated to ongoing campus controversy. Unrelated. The word burned. Commentators speculated about copycat behavior and heightened emotions. Social media skeptics suggested Malcolm was playing it up. Others questioned why there were no arrests yet, as if justice ran on convenience. Tyler Grant watched the coverage from a ski lodge in Vermont. That was his alibi, or at least that's what his father had arranged. Photos posted, time-stamped stories. Tyler smiling beside a fireplace, holding a drink, pretending nothing was wrong. When asked by a reporter for comment, Tyler released a statement through his lawyer. "I condemn all acts of vandalism and hate. I was out of state at the time of the incident and had no involvement whatsoever." Out of state. The narrative almost worked. until it didn't. 3 blocks away from Malcolm's house, a retired IT technician named Walter Hayes reviewed his home security footage out of habit. He lived alone. He liked routine. He liked knowing what happened around his property. At 2:41 a.m., his camera caught something unusual. A figure running, not away from Malcolm's house, but toward the bus stop at the end of the street. The hoodie was unmistakable. The Benton University logo clear as day under the streetlight. The person stumbled, nearly fell, then looked back. The camera caught the face. Not clearly enough for a headline, but clearly enough for recognition. Walter leaned closer to the screen. He had seen that face before, at a donor luncheon 2 years earlier. His niece worked catering. The man had laughed too loud, joked about owning half the campus. Walter exported the clip. He didn't go to the police. He emailed it to a student journalist he trusted. By noon, the footage was circulating privately among activists and legal teams. By evening, it was leaked. The internet erupted. Side-by-side comparisons appeared within minutes. Screenshots from Tyler's own social media. The jawline. The gait. The hoodie sold only at the campus bookstore. Limited edition issued to select student board members. The narrative collapsed. Tyler's lawyer scrambled. Robert Grant made calls that went unanswered. Benton University issued no statement this time. The police reopened the case, and then came the confirmation that changed everything. A gas station clerk, 2 miles from Malcolm's house, came forward after recognizing the hoodie on the news. He had sold coffee to a young man matching Tyler's description at 2:12 a.m. That night, the receipt timestamped it. Vermont was a lie. Tyler was not out of state. He had been here, watching, waiting. By midnight, the footage was everywhere. National news, social media, legal commentary. Headlines no longer asked if there was retaliation, but who had ordered it. Malcolm sat quietly in Leah's guest room, watching it unfold. His house was being cleaned by volunteers. His car towed. His phone buzzing nonstop. He didn't answer. He already knew the truth had crossed the point of no return. At 11:58 p.m., the leaked security footage aired on national television. 2 minutes later, a breaking news banner flashed across the screen. Benton University student, Tyler Grant, named person of interest in vandalism case. Police confirm active investigation. And as the anchor continued speaking, a final alert lit up Malcolm's phone. Federal investigators are expanding the case. This is no longer just about vandalism. Christmas Eve at Benton University had never been silent, but this year it was somber. There were no wreaths hanging from the admin building. No choirs singing carols on the library steps. No staged photos of smiling donors in holiday-themed blazers. Instead, there were candles, hundreds of them, flickering in the biting December air, held by gloved hands and trembling hearts. The quad was full, despite the freezing temperatures. Students wrapped in scarves and coats stood shoulder to shoulder in solemn formation, the hush of reverence replacing chants, bullhorns, or slogans. At the center, a long white banner stretched across the library steps. It read, "We remember what they erased." Each candle was dedicated to a name, names pulled directly from the digital folder Malcolm had unearthed, 10 years' worth of students and staff who had filed discrimination complaints, only to have their stories buried, dismissed, or erased entirely. Names that had lived only in redacted lines and archived PDFs were now spoken aloud for the first time. Jasmine Cole reported a racial slur in her dorm. No action taken. Terrence Lloyd, removed from student government after challenging donor bias. Rena Fields, left Benton after being labeled difficult for reporting faculty misconduct. Each name echoed, not as accusations, but as truth-reclaiming space. Malcolm stood at the back of the crowd, barely recognizable in a black overcoat and wool hat. He hadn't planned to attend. Leah had advised against it, said the federal investigation was too fragile, that visibility could make him a target again. But when he saw the live stream and heard the names spoken like prayers, he knew he couldn't stay away. Beside him stood Kimari Barnes, the student whose voice had ignited a movement. "They're not afraid anymore," she said quietly. "They were never afraid," Malcolm replied, "just waiting for someone to believe them." Kimari turned toward him. "And now they do, because of you." But Malcolm shook his head. "Because of us." The protest had grown beyond anything Benton's board could contain. What began as a candlelight vigil had transformed into a collective reckoning. Students from neighboring universities arrived in buses, bringing their own stories. Alumni flew in from across the country. Some arrived with protest signs. others with printed screenshots of old complaints, each one now a form of public testimony. A row of professors stood on the steps, holding signs that read, "We knew, we were wrong." That image, tenured faculty admitting complicity, hit social media like a tidal wave. Then came the resignations. Dr. Victor Helsley, longtime chair of the Faculty Senate, submitted his letter publicly. Silence is no longer ethical. 3 deans followed. A group of department heads released a joint statement. Until systemic structures are dismantled, we refuse to remain complicit. Benton University's president, Robert Delmont, had not been seen for days. Rumors swirled that he had fled to his secondary home in the Pacific Northwest, unreachable by phone. The silence from the upper administration grew louder than any speech. And then, at precisely 7:22 p.m., the university released a statement that would alter its legacy forever. Effective immediately, Benton University will suspend all operations for internal restructuring and compliance review. The current administrative cabinet will step down. A provisional oversight board will be assembled within 4. Shock rippled through the crowd. A university, one of the oldest in the state, was shutting down. Not for a snowstorm, not for budget cuts, but because of accountability. Some students gasped. Others clapped. A few sobbed. It was more than a victory. It was validation. The kind that few had ever seen in real time. News outlets swarmed the campus within an hour. Headlines blazed across screens. Student-led protest shuts down Benton University. From tie to transformation, professors' stand restructures campus power. This is what reckoning looks like. As camera crews filmed candlelight interviews, Malcolm stood in the shadows, hands in his pockets, watching the ripple of something long overdue. He didn't need to speak. The students had already said everything that mattered. But the story wasn't over. At 9:03 p.m., Leah stepped beside him, holding her phone with a strange expression. "You need to see this," she said. Malcolm took the phone. On the screen was a photo of an envelope, cream cardstock, sealed with an embossed Benton University emblem. Inside, a printed letter, the signature at the bottom, Dr. Helen Moore, appointed just hours earlier as acting dean by the Provisional Oversight Board. The message was short, direct. "Dr. Rhodes, we believe institutions do not collapse from truth. They rebuild through it. We invite you to serve as interim provost during the university's restructuring. Should you accept, you will lead not only curriculum reform, but cultural realignment. The time is yours. So is the choice." Malcolm stared at the letter. For a long time he said nothing. Around him the crowd kept chanting, singing, lighting more candles. But inside him something else stirred. It wasn't pride. It wasn't relief. It was the weight of opportunity and the cost of saying yes. For years he had navigated systems built to break him. Now they were asking him to redesign the blueprint. Kamari looked up at him. "Will you do it?" "I don't know," Malcolm said honestly. "This fight, it wasn't supposed to make me their replacement. It was supposed to make space. But what if you can do both?" Malcolm looked toward the administration building, now darkened, its lights off, its halls temporarily emptied. He imagined what it could be. Not perfect, not easy, but different. He exhaled, long and slow, and opened his mouth to answer. Before he could speak, Leah's phone buzzed with a new alert. She read it, froze, then looked at Malcolm with wide eyes. "They found something," she said, "in Tyler's family's financial disclosures. Offshore accounts, tied to the university." She handed him the phone. The headline was fresh: "Fraud linked to Benton donors. DOJ launches investigation." And at the bottom, "Robert Grant, under federal review. Wire transfers traced to academic bribery scheme." The winter sun hung low over Benton University as the campus reopened its gates in the new year. Snow still clung to the edges of brick buildings, and the air bit through coats like quiet consequence. But beneath the frost, something had thawed, something structural. For the first time in its 17-year history, Benton University reopened under new leadership, a restructured administration, and a rewritten code of conduct, rooted not in damage control, but in accountability. The scandal hadn't just shifted public perception. It had rewritten the institution's story. Malcolm Rhodes hadn't yet accepted the interim provost position. He'd asked for time. Time to reflect. Time to breathe. Time to decide whether a man trained to survive systems could be the one to rebuild them. But there was one thing he did not need more time to do: teach. So on the first day of the spring semester, Malcolm returned to his lecture hall. Room 2014. The same room where it all began. He arrived 15 minutes early. This time, no silence greeted him. No anxious glances, no stiff nods of avoidance. Instead, students began to applaud the moment he entered. One stood, then another, then all, a full standing ovation. Malcolm stood motionless for a beat, coat still buttoned, briefcase in hand. He scanned the room, familiar faces, new ones, many with eyes that had watched the truth unfold across screens during winter break. It wasn't worship, it wasn't pity, it was recognition. He placed his briefcase on the desk, undid his coat, and pulled it off slowly, revealing the same Christmas tie. That same deep red and green. That same subtle gold stitching. Still straight. Still proud. The applause quieted. He looked up, and there, near the back row, stood Tyler Grant, but not as a student. He wore a plain gray university custodial uniform, a reflective safety vest, and held a broom loosely in one hand. His posture was stiff. His eyes avoided Malcolm's. The judge had spared him a record, but not accountability. Tyler had been sentenced to court-ordered community service on campus grounds as part of a negotiated plea to avoid obstruction and destruction of property charges. Now he swept the floors of the very building where he once thought himself above consequence. Malcolm gave no pause. He didn't acknowledge Tyler directly, not because he was petty, not because he hadn't forgiven him, but because this lecture wasn't about Tyler. It never was. He stepped to the podium and opened his notes, though he didn't glance at them once. When I was a boy, Malcolm began, my father gave me a necktie every year for Christmas. Same pattern, same message, and I never understood why. I thought it was just a gesture, tradition, until the year he gave me one after being publicly denied a teaching position he was qualified for because of his tone. He paced slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply put on that tie the next morning and went to a different classroom. And I remember asking him, why not fight them? And he said, son, I did. I showed up anyway. The room was silent. Breath held. Malcolm's voice grew stronger. Dignity is not weakness. Restraint is not surrender. And history, our history is not just in books. It walks into rooms like this, wearing ties that shouldn't have to mean anything. But they do, because someone always wants to remind us we don't belong. He stopped at the center of the stage. I've spent my career walking that line, between silence and survival, between truth and tenure. But this past semester, that line shattered. Not because I changed, but because we finally saw the system for what it was. Not broken, but built this way. Several students nodded, others wiped quiet tears. And when that system tried to erase me, not with slurs but with statements, policies, memos, you all refused. You didn't rally for me. You rallied for us. For the names buried in those files. For the students gaslighted by professionalism. For every whispered complaint that deserved to be a headline. He turned toward the whiteboard, and in bold he wrote, resistance is a curriculum. Let no one tell you that being silent makes you noble. Let no one tell you that your anger disqualifies your brilliance. Let no one tell you that dignity means passivity. He paused. Resistance is knowing who you are in a room designed to misdefine you, and refusing to apologize for it. Applause erupted. It wasn't performative. It was visceral. Tyler stood in the back, unmoving. His face was unreadable. Whether shame or revelation had finally caught him was unclear, but for once he said nothing. As the lecture ended, students approached Malcolm with cautious reverence. Some shook his hand. Others left letters on the desk. One student simply bowed their head and whispered, thank you for staying. The room began to empty, but Malcolm lingered. He turned toward the back wall of the lecture hall. Hanging there, framed and freshly installed, was a photograph of his father, Elijah Rhodes, mid-speech, tie visible, hand raised. Below it, a plaque, in honor of every voice they tried to silence, and failed. Malcolm stepped toward it slowly. As he stood in front of it, a student, new, maybe a freshman, approached him hesitantly. She was small, wore thick glasses, and clutched her notebook tightly. She looked at him, eyes wide. Professor? She asked softly.
Yes?
She glanced at the photo, then back at him. After everything, was it worth it? Malcolm turned back to the photo. For a moment, he saw his younger self in the image's reflection. The boy who didn't yet know that showing up would one day be his revolution. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled the edge of his tie, adjusted it gently, and then looked the student in the eyes. Before Malcolm could respond, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Leah. You need to come to DC, immediately. The DOJ just flipped someone. We now know who buried the 2016 tenure review file. And why. Attached was a name. Dean Victor Helsley. Spring faded gently into summer at Benton University, and for the first time in living memory, the campus air didn't carry the heavy silence of denial. It carried the pulse of awareness. Walkways once named after legacy donors were replaced with names pulled from buried complaints. The administration building, once marbled with secrets, now held transparency forums every month, with open transcripts and rotating student representatives. And in the heart of it all, just beyond the new campus center, stood a sleek glass structure, the Truth and Reckoning exhibit. It was small, modest by design. No grandiose murals, no digital projections, just quiet space, carefully curated, dedicated to the voices that had once been invisible. Inside were testimonies, recorded in hushed voices, photographs of handwritten complaint letters, scanned emails that had once been hidden by institutional firewalls. But at the center of the exhibit, encased in glass and lit from above, sat one item: a tie, deep bed, soft green, with golden accents threaded through it like veins. Below it, a plaque read, "Worn in silence, answered in truth, gifted in change," donated by Dr. Malcolm E. Rhodes. By the time the exhibit opened, Malcolm was no longer on campus. He had formally declined the permanent provost role 2 months earlier. He said he didn't want to become what he fought. He didn't want to trade one seat of power for another. What he wanted was what he always wanted: freedom to teach, to shape minds without fighting for air inside rooms designed to choke. He quietly submitted his retirement papers. No press conference, no fanfare, just a handwritten note, left on Leah's desk. "It's time to make room for more voices. I've said what I needed to say. Now let others say more." Still, his impact didn't end there. His lectures were archived and integrated into Benton's new core curriculum on ethics and systemic power. His unpublished book, the same manuscript he once sent anonymously to Tyler, was picked up by a major academic press and released nationwide. It hit bestseller lists within weeks under a new title: Measured Fire, Surviving Institutions That Refuse to See You. Even Tyler's name had become a ghost in the story. After the Department of Justice confirmed financial misconduct, linked to his father's donations, complete with fake internships, fabricated references, and pressure campaigns on faculty, Robert Grant resigned from every board he served on. Several of his assets were frozen. Media pundits speculated about Tyler's whereabouts, but no one could confirm. Some claimed he'd moved to a small town in the Midwest, under a new name. Others believed he was overseas, far from the shadow of a scandal that once made him viral for all the wrong reasons. But the story wasn't about Tyler anymore. It had never really been. It was about the note, that note. "They're watching you. Don't quit now." The piece of folded paper that had appeared beneath Malcolm's office door on a day he was preparing to walk away. A note that gave him pause. A note that interrupted resignation. For months, its origin was a mystery. Students speculated. Faculty whispered. Some believed it was Leah. Others suggested it was from Chase Duncan, the fraternity brother who'd turned against Tyler. Malcolm never said. He never claimed to know, until one day he did. It was months after his retirement, during a quiet lunch with Kamari Barnes, now a campus organizer with national reach. They were seated at a small cafe off campus, tucked away from cameras, sipping tea in the shade. Kamari leaned forward, curious. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. "Who wrote that note?" Malcolm smiled, gaze distant. "I used to?" He nodded, then pulled out a thin, weathered envelope from his satchel. "The original note. I figured it out." Kamari's eyes widened. "Wait, you never told anyone?" "Didn't see the need," he said. "They did what they needed to do. The rest didn't matter." She tilted her head. "But Malcolm hesitated, then handed her the envelope. Kamari unfolded it. On the back of the paper, faintly visible in the corner, was an imprint like someone had pressed a hard pen too firmly, barely noticeable, unless you were looking. The letters were simple, initials. Messi. Kamari blinked, then gasped. "Marcus Callahan?" she said, stunned. "The custodian?" Malcolm nodded slowly. Marcus had been at Benton for over 20 years, a quiet man, observant, the kind who knew everything and said nothing. He was invisible by design. That's how the institution trained him to survive. But he had seen what happened in Malcolm's classroom. He'd been cleaning the hallway that day, and when he overheard the silence, the lack of intervention, the hurt in Malcolm's footsteps, he knew what was coming. Knew that men like Malcolm, were always a moment away from being replaced. So he wrote the note. No big speech, no rally, just 4 words. And in doing so, he rewrote the future. Kamari folded the note back, eyes misted. Why didn't you tell anyone? Malcolm looked toward the window, toward the university skyline, where the new exhibit now stood. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let the world think it figured something out on its own. He smiled. I didn't need credit, I just needed change. That afternoon, they parted ways quietly. No cameras, no interviews, just gratitude and legacy. And weeks later, when the new semester began, something unexpected happened. In the same lecture hall where Malcolm once taught, room 214, a freshman student arrived early for her first ethics and leadership course. She was nervous, new, hopeful. She took a seat near the front row. She opened her textbook, still shrink-wrapped, and inside the cover, slipped between the pages, was a folded note. She opened it. 4 words. They're watching you. Don't quit now. She looked around. No one had seen her read it. But somehow she felt seen. Some stories aren't just stories. They're warnings. Because silence isn't neutral, and comfort can be complicit. If you've ever felt the weight of being unheard, unseen, or unprotected, this was for you. Type yes if you believe the truth should never be buried. Subscribe if this broke your heart.